In space, no one can hear you scream. Unless, of course, you're Captain Riven Cross, and you've got a comm link directly into the ear of your crew. I'm telling you, it's all going to shit, Cross said, leaning against the doorframe of the mercenary ship's bridge, his voice carrying that special blend of exasperation and sarcasm perfected by field leaders everywhere. And not the good kind, either. This is the kind that's going to stink up the entire quadrant. Through the flickering holoscreen, which was displaying a rather pixelated version of the Arbitrium station, Cross could see the mess they were flying into. Arbitrium was the kind of place that gave deteriorating a run for its money. The space station orbited a dying star, the kind of romantic touch you'd expect in a sci-fi novel, but not where you'd want to hold a peace conference unless you had a death wish or an unyielding faith in duct tape. "Don't worry, Captain," interjected Weiss, Cross's resident cynic and the closest thing to a friend he'd allow himself. "I hear the food rations are almost expired, which means they probably won't kill us outright. That's something, right?" Cross grunted, his universal sign of agreement or disagreement. It was anyone's guess. "Just keep us from crashing into that piece of junk," he said. "I want my last moments to be a little more dignified than splattering across an alien conference hall." The rest of the crew might have laughed if they weren't so busy checking the station's docking protocols, dodging debris, and nursing hangovers from the night before. Typical morning on the Arrogance, Cross's not-so-humble pile of metal and circuits. "Heads up, we're getting a transmission," Weiss said, flicking the switch to put the incoming message up on the screen. A figure appeared, slightly out of focus. Ambassador Therax of the V-Real conglomerate, sporting a face that looked like it had been modeled out of Play-Doh and then stepped on by a giant boot. "Captain Cross," Therax said, his voice a sonorous rumble. "We trust you are prepared for the task we have assigned you." "Listen, Therax, I don't trust anyone who uses we when referring to themselves," Cross replied, scratching his chin. "But don't worry, we're all set. Just try not to kill each other before we get there." The ambassador blinked, a slow, deliberate gesture that could have been annoyance or just the natural pace of his species. "The peace of our galaxy depends on this conference. We expect your utmost diligence. Expect in one hand, shit in the other, see which fills up first," Weiss whispered, barely loud enough to catch. "Roger that," Cross said, tapping the control to cut the transmission. "You hear that, team? Galactic peace is in our hands." "That's why we're screwed," muttered Rix, the ship's engineer who had been fiddling with the ship's failing temperature controls. "We can't even keep the heat on in here." "Tough audience," Cross mused, turning to scan his crew. The way he saw it, they were a ragtag team of misfits and rejects, each with their own special blend of dysfunction. But they were his misfits. "All right, folks, let's be professionals for once." "Define professional, Captain," asked Gina, their sharpshooter, who had just finished cleaning her favorite plasma rifle for the third time that morning. "Because I'm not wearing a suit." "Just don't shoot anyone unless I say so," Cross replied. "And remember, we're here to stop a war, not start one." "Aye, aye, Captain," Gina said, though she didn't look entirely convinced. The docking process was about as smooth as a rhino ballet, but they managed it without any explosions, always a good start. The crew disembarked into the station's main hall, which was a study in industrial chic if chic meant peeling walls and the constant threat of cosmic radiation. "Welcome to Arbitrium Station, where the air is thin and tempers are thinner," Cross announced. As they marched through the corridors, Cross could feel the eyes of various alien delegates upon them, their gazes a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and something else, fear maybe. It wasn't uncommon. Humans with their unpredictable dreams were a mystery wrapped in an enigma, seasoned with a bit of madness. "Captain, are you noticing the weird looks?" Rix asked, his voice low. "Yeah, but I get those all the time," Cross said with a smirk. "Probably just jealous of our swagger. Or maybe they heard about the dreams," Weiss added, a hint of concern creeping into his normally sardonic tone. Cross nodded. The dreams had been intensifying lately. Odd, unsettling visions that slipped into the minds of the crew, making sleep a risky venture. But the aliens didn't just fear the dreams, they were downright terrified. "Okay, let's focus," Cross said, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. "We need to get to the conference room and make sure nobody's drawn first blood yet." The conference room was a large, circular chamber filled with representatives from dozens of species. It was a colorful menagerie of scales, fur, and exoskeletons, all glaring at each other across the polished table. "Ah, humanity arrives," said a snide voice from the far end of the room. It was Drelk, a skittish Grillian with skin that resembled burnt toast. "Late, as usual." "Fashionably late," Cross corrected, taking his seat. "Someone has to be the main attraction." Drelk sneered, a grotesque expression on a face not designed for it. "I suppose you think your presence will prevent war, human. If by prevent, you mean make it slightly less likely everyone here kills each other, then yes," Cross replied, leaning back in his chair. "It's amazing what the promise of a cold beer and a long nap can do." The room erupted into a cacophony of alien languages, most of them not flattering. Cross let them vent. It was good to know some things were universal. Amidst the chaos, an unexpected chill swept the room. The other delegates fell silent, glancing around as if expecting something to jump out and bite them. "What the hell is that?" Gina whispered, her hand sliding toward her holstered weapon. "No idea," Cross admitted, frowning. "But it feels like trouble." Above them, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Cross had seen enough horror vids to know when things were about to get worse. Suddenly, the room's center hologram, intended to project a map of the galaxy, glitched, and instead displayed a scene so familiar it sent shivers down Cross's spine. A vast, dark ocean under a blood-red sky, waves crashing violently as a storm brewed overhead. "Isn't that?" Rick started but trailed off, his skin paling several shades. "Yeah," Cross agreed, his throat dry. "We dreamed this." Panic spread through the delegates like wildfire, each species reacting in its own way. Some hissed, others chittered, and a few simply fainted where they stood. "Calm down," Cross shouted, trying to regain control. "It's just a glitch." But deep down, he knew better. The dreams, those damned human dreams, were making their presence known. And whatever was causing them wasn't finished yet. "Captain," Weiss said, sidling up to him, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think we might have a problem bigger than just keeping these folks from each other's throats." "No shit," Cross replied, eyeing the malfunctioning holo display. "Just another day at the office." As the chaos subsided slightly, Cross took a deep breath, trying to think. They needed a plan, something to keep this from spiraling into galactic war. "All right," he said finally, addressing the room. "Listen up. We've got a mess on our hands, and we can either sort it out together or let it tear us apart." "Easy for you to say, human," Drelk spat, recovering from his shock. "Your kind is responsible for this madness." "Maybe," Cross conceded, shrugging. "But I'm offering you a chance to fix it. Or would you rather go back to negotiating with plasma rifles?" The room was silent, the tension palpable. Cross knew it was a gamble, but it was the only option they had left. "We'll need to trace the source of these dreams," Weiss suggested, his voice cutting through the silence. "Figure out why they're manifesting here and now." "Easier said than done," Rix muttered. "Not if we work together," Gina added, her tone surprisingly optimistic. Cross looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each delegate in turn. "What do you say? Truce until we sort this out." There was a reluctant murmur of agreement. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "All right then," Cross said, feeling the weight of the task ahead. "Let's get to work before this dream becomes a nightmare." As they began to formulate a plan, Cross couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something far larger than any of them had anticipated. Whatever lay ahead, it would test not just their resolve, but the strength of humanity's reputation across the stars. And that was a terrifying thought indeed. The peace conference dragged on like a bad hangover, the kind where you swear off drinking forever but know you're lying. The alien delegates were still twitchy, which wasn't surprising given the circumstances. Imagine finding out that humans, those unpredictable hairless apes, might be weaponizing their dreams. It's a bit like discovering your neighbor has been training their pet squirrel to break into your house. Cross tried to keep things on track, but every time he opened his mouth, it felt like trying to herd cats, or in this case, cats with extra limbs and a penchant for paranoia. Ambassador Tharax, sitting with the grace of a crumpled accordion, attempted to impose order, which mostly involved rumbling threats and making everyone feel very small. "We must focus on the matter at hand," he boomed, like a thundercloud that had learned to speak. Drelk, the Grillion who looked as if someone had left him in the oven too long, sneered. "Easy for humans. Your dreams are causing this chaos." Cross rolled his eyes, which was practically a workout at this point. "Yeah, because we sit around planning intergalactic sleepovers with dream invasions as the main course," the delegates muttered, some in languages that sounded like a blender full of nails. The mood was deteriorating faster than Arbitrium Station's walls, and that was saying something. Weiss sidled up to Cross, his face set in its usual expression of practiced cynicism. "We need to do something before this turns into a cosmic brawl. Got any bright ideas?" Cross asked, watching as a tentacled diplomat attempted to eat its own translation device. "Because I'm fresh out." "Just one," Weiss said, but his voice was unusually grim. "We need to check the station's systems. Something stinks, and it's not just the roasted Grillion." Cross nodded. "Rix, get over here," he barked across the room, where the engineer was lurking near the snack table, eyeing a suspiciously moving plate of hors d'oeuvres. Rix sauntered over, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, preferably somewhere with 0 alien delegates. "What's up?" "We need to check the station's systems," Cross said. "Something's not right, and it's not just the fact that we're here to babysit a bunch of cosmic toddlers." Rick sighed, tugging at his thinning hair. "All right, but if we find something, I'm demanding a raise." "You're already overpaid," Weiss quipped, earning a glare. The three of them slipped away from the conference room and headed toward the station's control center, a place that looked like a junkyard's fever dream. Wires dangled from the ceiling like a bored octopus, and the lights flickered with a stutter that made it feel like a bad nightclub. Rick started tinkering with the main console, which probably hadn't been updated since before the galaxy had laws. "This station's a death trap," he muttered, tapping a screen that responded with all the enthusiasm of a sloth on a hot day. "Surprised it's still in orbit. Tell me about it," Cross said. "But focus, okay. We need to find out if someone is using these dream glitches to their advantage." "Besides us?" Weiss asked, leaning against a wall that creaked ominously. Rix cursed under his breath as he worked. "Okay, I'm in and—" "Oh hell." "What?" Cross asked, peering over his shoulder at the tangle of data. "There's a subroutine here that's rerouting power from the station's comm systems. Looks like someone's been piggybacking signals." Cross frowned. "So what? Someone's using the station's systems to amplify the dream effects." "Seems like it," Rick said, scratching his head. "And they're doing a damn good job of hiding it." Weiss crossed his arms, a dry smile playing on his lips. "Well, congratulations, Captain. We're officially in the middle of a sabotage plot." "Just another day at the office," Cross replied, not missing a beat. "Can you trace it?" Rix nodded, already tapping away. "Give me a minute. It's like untangling a bowl of spaghetti coated by a lunatic, but I'll get there." As they waited, Cross's mind raced. If someone was using the station to exploit the dreams, it turned an already precarious situation into a potential disaster. Made sense, though. Nothing like a bit of engineered chaos to give someone an edge. "Got it," Rick said after a few tense moments. "The signal's coming from the lower levels, Deck 87. Because of course it's the creepy abandoned part of the station," Weiss said with a mock shiver. "Why can't bad guys ever work out of somewhere nice like a spa? Because then we might enjoy ourselves," Rix replied, shutting down the console. "What now, Captain?" "We go check it out," Cross said. "Just the three of us. No need to panic the rest of the delegates." "Sure," Weiss said, a sardonic glint in his eye. "Because we're not panicking at all." They made their way down to the lower decks, the corridors growing darker and more foreboding with each step. It was the kind of place that would be perfect for a murder mystery if anyone cared enough to investigate. Deck 87 was practically a crime scene in itself, with debris littering the floor and the walls smeared with something that was best left unidentified. Rix led the way, his handheld scanner beeping softly as it tracked the rogue signal. "There," he said finally, pointing to a door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. "It's coming from inside." "Okay," Cross said, steeling himself. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The door opened with a groan that echoed down the corridor, revealing a small room filled with equipment that looked both ancient and terrifyingly advanced. In the center, a device hummed softly, pulsing with an ominous red light. "That's it," Rick said needlessly, his voice hushed with awe and trepidation. "What does it do?" Weiss asked, poking a finger at the console. "Looks like it's amplifying brainwave patterns," Rix replied, studying the readouts. "Whoever set this up isn't just intercepting the dreams, they're enhancing them, making them more potent." "Great," Cross said, rubbing his temples. "An intergalactic dream machine, just what we needed." "So we turn it off, right?" Weiss asked, sounding almost hopeful. "Not so fast," Rick said, glancing around. "We can't just unplug it. Whoever did this might have fail-safes." "Could backfire spectacularly," Cross cursed under his breath. "So what do? We could try reconfiguring it," Rick suggested reluctantly. "Redirect the output back to its source. And hope that doesn't blow us all to hell," Weiss added, ever the optimist. "Pretty much," Rick said with a shrug. "All right, do it," Cross said, steeling himself for whatever might come next. Rick's got to work, fingers flying over the controls with a practiced ease that belied the tension in the room. Weiss stood guard at the door, scanning the corridors for any unwanted visitors. "So," Weiss said, glancing back at Cross, "think this will actually help the conference?" "It better," Cross replied, "or we're going to have a lot of angry aliens on our hands." "Just another Tuesday then," Weiss said with a dry chuckle. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. Finally, Rick stepped back from the console, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's done. Output's redirected." "Good," Cross said, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Let's get back and see if it makes any difference." They made their way back to the conference room, where the delegates were still bickering like a galactic version of a dysfunctional family reunion. But there was a subtle shift in the air, a lessening of the tension that had gripped the room earlier. Cross took his place at the table, noting the suspicious glances from the alien representatives. "All right, folks," he said, raising his voice over the din. "We've dealt with the little problem. Now can we get back to the business of not shooting each other?" Tharax, ever the picture of dignified disdain, nodded slowly. "Very well, Captain. We shall see if your actions have any effect." Drelk, never one to miss an opportunity to sneer, added, "I suppose we can hold off on the plasma rifles for now." "That's the spirit," Cross said, forcing a grin. "Let's see if we can't make some actual progress." As the discussions resumed, Cross felt a flicker of hope, a small ember in the darkness. Maybe, just maybe, they'd avert disaster after all. Of course, he reminded himself, they still had to figure out who was behind the sabotage. But that was a problem for another moment. Right now, they had to keep the peace and prove that humans weren't just the galaxy's resident dreamweavers. No pressure. As the conference continued, punctuated by the usual squabbles and snide remarks, Cross couldn't shake the feeling that they were teetering on the edge of something vast and unknown. The galaxy was full of puzzles, and this was just another piece in a cosmic jigsaw. But for now, they'd managed to avert disaster, and that was enough to call it a win. At least, until the next crisis came knocking. The conference room buzzed with the usual cacophony of interstellar diplomacy, if you could call it that. Arbitrium Station was holding together by sheer willpower and a mountain of duct tape, much like the peace talks themselves. The delegates, a mismatch of species that looked like they'd escaped from a particularly unsettling zoo, were back to their argument, although slightly less bloodthirsty than before. Cross leaned against a wall, contemplating whether an actual zoo might have been a better venue. At least there, the animals didn't pretend to be civil. He sighed, rubbing his temples. It seemed their little escapade had brought some relief, but the hard part was far from over. He caught Weiss's eye, who gave a small nod, acknowledging that, for now, the peace conference was less likely to explode into interstellar war. Rix, ever the engineer, was back at the console, tapping away with his usual blend of impatience and reluctant diligence. "We should keep monitoring," he said, his voice just loud enough to rise above the din. "Whoever set up that nightmare machine might have friends. 'Cause we're short on friends ourselves," Weiss drawled, glancing at a tentacled delegate who seemed intent on gesticulating its way into a catastrophe. "Might be nice to have a little solidarity, yeah. One big happy galaxy," Cross muttered, "where everyone's ready to stab you in the back, or front if they're polite about it," Weiss added with a smirk. Just then the comm link crackled to life in Cross's ear. "Captain," crackled the voice of Therax. The ambassador's tone was as smarmy as ever, a calculated mix of disdain and superiority. "We've identified a problem, only one," Cross replied, unable to resist the jab. "Must be a good day. Factions within the station are capitalizing on the dream disturbances," Therax continued, ignoring the sarcasm. "They want to destabilize the conference further," Cross grimaced. "Of course, this mess wasn't complicated enough. Any idea who? Rumors suggest the Syndicate might be involved," Therax said. "They've always been opportunistic." "The Syndicate," Weiss repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because things weren't interesting enough." Cross nodded slowly, gears turning in his head. The Syndicate was a shadowy conglomerate of semi-legal enterprises. Think corporate pirates with a taste for chaos. Exactly the kind of folks who'd love to play puppet master with a peace conference. "We need to find out what they are up to," Cross said, voice low. "And fast, sure," Rix replied, not looking up from his console. "Let's just wander around waving a sign that says, 'Please kill us now.' Got a better plan?" Cross shot back. Rix responded with a grumble that might have been a no. They needed allies and fast, but allies were in short supply on this rust bucket of a station. Cross scanned the room, eyes landing on an unlikely candidate, a hulking figure standing near the back, watching with dispassionate interest. It was Drelk, the Grillian who'd been the first to voice concerns about weaponized dreams. "Drelk," Cross called, making his way over. "Got a minute?" The Grillian turned its bulbous eyes on him, languidly blinking. "For the captain of such a reputable crew," it said, voice like gravel in a blender. "I suppose we need information about the Syndicate," Cross said bluntly. "And you seem like someone who knows things." Drelk's eyes narrowed. "And why should I assist you?" Cross glanced around the room, nodding toward the delegates. "Because if this place falls apart, none of us are getting out without a fight. And I'd rather not test the Grillian's famed endurance against a plasma rifle." Drelk considered this, twisting its mouth into what could generously be called a grin. "Very well, human. I shall see what I can uncover." "Thanks," Cross said, genuinely grateful. "And Drelk, keep it quiet. We don't want to alert anyone we're onto them, really." Rix interjected, and here I thought we'd send out a newsletter. With Drelk on board, they had a sliver of hope. Of course, hope was about as useful as a chocolate spacesuit in their line of work, but you took what you could get. As the conference dragged on, Cross, Weiss, and Rix slipped out to regroup. The corridors felt even more claustrophobic than before, the flickering lights casting long shadows that danced unsettlingly against the walls. It was like walking through the bowels of some mechanical beast ready to devour them whole. They gathered in a cramped alcove, where the walls didn't quite meet the ceiling and the air carried the faint tang of burnt circuitry. "This place gives me the creeps," Weiss muttered, eyeing the shadows warily. "Wait till the lights go out," Rix replied, leaning against a wall that groaned in protest. "Then you'll know real terror." Cross considered their options, which were, frankly, thinner than a politician's promise. "We need to find out what the Syndicate's planning," he said, "and we need to stop it without blowing the whole station to hell." Well, when you put it like that, Weiss said with a half-smile, sounds downright easy. We're going to need more eyes and ears, though, Cross said. Can't just rely on Drelk. Rix nodded, reluctantly agreeing. I'll see what I can do with the station's surveillance systems. Maybe we can patch into the feeds without alerting anyone. Good, Cross said, clapping Rix on the shoulder. Weiss, I need you to stay close to the delegates. Keep them calm, or at least not actively trying to kill each other. Weiss gave a mock salute. Babysitting duty. My favorite, and I'll see what I can dig up about the syndicate, Cross said, already dreading the prospect of navigating the station's labyrinthine politics. It was a tenuous plan at best, but they'd survived on less. Desperation was a great motivator, after all. Iors passed, dragging by like a wounded slug. Cross navigated the narrow corridors, avoiding suspicious glances and the occasional delegate too lost in their own importance to notice the chaos brewing around them. He tapped into old contacts, whispered conversations in shadowed corners, each one a delicate dance around the truth. Eventually, he found himself in a dimly lit cantina, the kind of place where secrets were the only currency and trust was a four-letter word. The air was thick with smoke and tension, the patrons a mix of station staff, and those who preferred to remain nameless. Cross approached a table occupied by a wiry figure with a face that could cut glass. Voss, he said, sliding into the seat opposite. Heard you might have some intel. Voss looked up, one eyebrow raised in a gesture that suggested he was already bored. Cross. Didn't expect to see you in this rat's nest. Desperate times, Cross replied, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. What do you know about the syndicate's play here? Voss took a slow drag on his cigarette, exhaling a cloud that seemed to hang in the air like a judgment. They're stirring the pot, looking to reap the rewards when things fall apart, which is a terrible idea for anyone with a pulse, Cross said. What's their angle control? Voss replied simply. Chaos breeds opportunity, and they've got their eyes on some key assets. Care to be more specific? Cross prompted, feeling his patience fray. Voss leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. Everything has a price, Captain. Cross suppressed a sigh, reaching for the small pouch at his belt. He tossed it onto the table where it landed with a satisfying clink. Consider it a down payment. Voss picked up the pouch, weighing it in his hand before nodding. The syndicate wants access to the station's defense systems. They figure if they control those, they control the talks. Cross felt a chill run down his spine. And where are they now? Last I heard they were sniffing around the lower decks trying to find a way in, Voss said, pocketing the pouch. But you didn't hear it from me. Of course not, Cross agreed, standing up. Pleasure as always, Voss. Likewise, Captain, Voss replied with a wink. Try not to get yourself killed. With that information rattling in his brain, Cross made his way back to the others. It seemed the syndicate was playing a high-stakes game, one that could tip the balance of power on Arbitrium Station and beyond. He found Weiss and Rix huddled around a holoscreen, the flickering light casting their faces in sharp relief. Got something, Cross said, sliding into a seat beside them. Good news? Weiss asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't expecting any. Depends on your definition, Cross replied. The syndicate's after the station's defense systems. They get in, they control the conference. Rix groaned. Because fixing one crisis wasn't enough. Exactly, Cross said. Rix, can you find a way to lock them out? I can try, Rix said, fingers already flying over the controls. But if they are determined, it's only a matter of time before they find another way in. We need to keep them busy, Cross said, thinking aloud. Distract them by some time, and how do you propose we do that? Weiss asked, arching an eyebrow. By making it look like they're already outmaneuvered, Cross said, warming to the idea. If they think we're onto them, they might slow down, regroup, or double down and come at us full force, Weiss pointed out. Optimism, Weiss, Cross said with a grin. It's why we keep you around. I thought it was my charming personality, Weiss deadpanned. Let's go with that, Cross said. Rix, set up some false trails, make it look like we're one step ahead. On it, Rix said, already absorbed in his work. As Rick set the plan in motion, Cross felt a glimmer of hope. It was a long shot, but sometimes that was all you had. If they could keep the syndicate off balance long enough, maybe they'd come out of this mess in one piece. Maybe. The station shuddered, a low groan reverberating through its structure like the death rattle of a mechanical beast. The delegates continued their dance of words, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath their feet. Cross watched them, a mixture of determination and grim amusement in his gaze. They were playing a dangerous game, one that could reshape the galaxy or tear it apart. But for now they had a fighting chance. And sometimes that was all you could ask for. In space, after all, hope was just another word for survival. The Arbitrium station shuddered again, a prelude to the chaos that was about to unfold. Captain Riven Cross, with a face that could outscowl a storm cloud, paced the dimly lit alcove. His comm link buzzed with activity, a constant reminder that his life was a perpetual mess of bad decisions and worse luck. "Captain," Weiss called, his voice cutting through the static. "We've got a problem. The delegates are losing their minds, literally." "Fantastic," Cross muttered, rubbing a hand through his already tousled hair. "Let's add mind-melting madness to our list of issues." "I know you love a challenge, Riven," Weiss quipped, "but this is pushing it." Cross shot him a look that would have melted steel. "Save the commentary, Weiss. What's happening?" "Dreams," Weiss said, a touch of awe in his voice, or maybe it was just the beginning of hysteria. "They're affecting people. Saw one of the delegates trying to make out with a potted plant. Not sure if he thought it was his wife or a really friendly fern." "Lovely," Cross replied, deadpan. "Exactly the kind of diplomacy this station needs." Rix appeared from somewhere within the bowels of the station, his expression one of grim resignation. "The defense systems are more tangled than a spider in a hurricane. I can keep the syndicate out for now, but it's like plugging holes in a sieve." "Great," Cross grunted. "Because our lives aren't complicated enough." As if on cue, the station gave another violent shudder, like a beast shaking off an itch. The lights flickered ominously, and for a moment, Cross wondered if the entire place would just implode and do them all a favor. Then again, knowing his luck, they'd survive and end up adrift in space with nothing but old rations and each other's company. "All right, let's get moving," Cross said, gesturing for his team to follow. "We've got to keep these peace talks from turning into a slugfest, and maybe find out who's behind the dream disturbances while we're at it." They took off down the narrow corridors, a ragtag trio of cynics against the universe's whims. As they twisted and turned through the labyrinthine passages, the station groaned like an old man with bad joints. Cross couldn't help but feel they were being stalked by something, an unseen threat lurking in the shadows. "Feels like we're being watched," Weiss muttered, stealing glances over his shoulder. "Welcome to my life," Cross replied. Paranoia's just another tool in the survival kit. They rounded a corner only to find themselves face to face with Drelk. The Grillion's eyes were wide, and not in that lazy, detached way, more like just saw a ghost wide. "Drelk," Cross said, "you look like someone just told you humans don't actually weaponize their dreams." "It's worse," Drelk croaked. "The Syndicate, they're not just after control. They want to use the dream disturbances to their advantage." "Typical," Rix grumbled. "Leave it to humans to find a way to turn nightmares into profit." Cross nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle onto his shoulders like a smothering blanket. "Weiss, get back to the delegates. Keep them as calm as you can without drugging them." "On it," Weiss said, already moving. "Rix, keep an eye on those systems. If we lose them, this conference is toast." "And I hate burnt toast," Rix replied, dry as desert sand. Drelk shuffled a hesitation Cross didn't like. "What is it?" he asked. "The Syndicate's got muscle in the lower decks. They're planning something big." "Of course they are," Cross sighed. "I swear if this station doesn't kill me, the stress will." With Weiss off to do his best impression of a diplomat and Rix buried in his control panels, Cross turned to Drelk. "You coming with me?" he asked. The Grillion blinked slowly. "I suppose. Watching you humans bumble about is mildly entertaining." Glad we could provide some amusement, Cross said, leading the way. They moved with as much stealth as a trio of misfits could muster, the station around them creaking like a haunted ship. Every step felt like it echoed into oblivion, and Cross couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go spectacularly wrong. "What's the plan?" Drelk asked, voice gravelly and curious. "Find the syndicate, stop whatever they're plotting, and maybe, just maybe, make it out alive," Cross replied. "Nothing too ambitious." "Very inspiring," Drelk said, the sarcasm not lost on Cross. Their journey took them deeper into the station's underbelly, where the walls seemed to close in and the air grew thick with tension. It was a place that reeked of forgotten promises and broken dreams, fitting, given the current situation. "Got any intel on their numbers?" Cross asked, eyes scanning for threats. "A handful, but they are crafty," Drelk said, "and well armed." "Because why not?" Cross muttered. "Wouldn't want this to be easy." They reached a door that looked as if it had been ripped straight from a horror vid, a bulkhead that groaned ominously with every vibration of the station. Cross gestured for silence, pressing his ear against the cold metal. Faint voices drifted through, too muffled to make out but enough to confirm they weren't alone. "Ready?" Cross whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "As I'll ever be," Drelk replied, his face a stone mask. Cross took a deep breath, the kind that tasted like regret and steel, then slammed his palm against the door's control panel. It hissed open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with syndicate operatives who looked about as thrilled to see them as Cross was to be there. "Evening, gents," Cross said, flashing a grin that was more teeth than joy. "Mind if we crash the party?" The nearest syndicate thug didn't bother with pleasantries, raising his weapon with a speed that made Cross's heart skip a beat. But before he could fire, Drelk lunged forward, a blur of muscle and intent. The Grillian collided with the thug, the impact sending both of them sprawling. Cross didn't waste the opportunity. He ducked to the side, narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma fire that scorched the wall where he'd been standing moments before. His comm link buzzed, Weiss's voice cutting through the chaos. "Riven, what's going on?" "Just making new friends," Cross replied, ducking again as more shots flew. "How's your end?" "Delegates are losing it. One of them just tried to start a fistfight with his own reflection." "Wonderful," Cross said, punching a syndicate goon with enough force to make his knuckles ache. "Keep them from killing each other, would you?" Easier said than done, Cross thought as he found himself dodging another attack. The room was a flurry of movement, each second feeling like an eternity. It was the kind of fight that was more about staying alive than looking good. Drelk was a force of nature, taking down opponents with a brutal efficiency that left Cross almost envious. A particularly bold thug lunged at Cross and he sidestepped, letting the man's momentum carry him into Drelk's waiting arms. There was a satisfying crunch, and Cross allowed himself a moment of appreciation. "Nice work, Drelk," he called, wiping sweat from his brow. Drelk grunted, which Cross took as the alien equivalent of a nod. The last of the thugs fell with a groan, and the sudden silence was more unsettling than the chaos had been. Cross took a moment to catch his breath, surveying the room for anything of use. "We need to move," Drelk said, his gaze sweeping the room. Cross nodded. "Yeah, before the rest of them show up." They slipped back into the corridor, the station shuddering around them as if it were a living thing in pain. Cross felt a grim satisfaction in their small victory, tempered by the knowledge that the real battle was far from over. As they made their way through the twisting passageways, Cross's mind was a storm of thoughts. The syndicate was still out there, plotting their next move, and the dream disturbances were only getting worse. "Any chance the dreams will just stop?" Cross asked, not really expecting an answer. "Unlikely," Drelk replied, his tone as dry as a desert. "Dreams have a way of sticking around. Great, just what we needed." They reached the alcove where they'd left Rix, who was still hunched over his controls, a look of intense concentration on his face. "How's it going?" Cross asked, skidding to a halt beside him. "Like trying to juggle grenades," Rix said without looking up. "We're keeping them out for now, but I wouldn't bet on it staying that way." Cross sighed, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on him. We need a new plan. New plan, Rix echoed, glancing up. Got any bright ideas, Captain? Not yet. But we can't let the syndicate get control. We could blow up the station, Weiss suggested, rejoining them with a harried look. That'd solve our problems. Cross gave him a withering stare. I'd like to avoid that, call me sentimental. Let's focus on keeping the defenses secure, Rix said, a note of determination in his voice. If we can hold them off, maybe we'll catch a break. Doubt it, Cross said, his voice full of wry humor. But we can always hope. It was a plan as thin as paper and about as likely to hold up under pressure. But it was all they had. As Cross looked around at his team, he couldn't help but feel a grudging sense of camaraderie. In a galaxy filled with chaos and uncertainty, they were in this together, for better or worse. And knowing them, it would probably be worse. But that was half the fun. As the oppressive gloom of Arbitrium Station's underbelly loomed over Captain Riven Cross and his ragtag team, the ducks above them groaned like a dying beast. It was a fitting soundtrack for the crumbling peace conference. Cross shook his head, trying to ignore the persistent headache throbbing in time with the station's death rattles. Why do I get the feeling we're the rats on this sinking ship? Weiss quipped, casting a sideways glance at Cross. Because we are, Cross replied dryly. And we're still searching for that iceberg. Drelk, the Grillian with a penchant for sarcasm, added his own unsolicited wisdom. At least we're proving that humans can adapt to any level of absurdity. Cross managed a smirk. Adaptation or just plain stupidity? Hard to tell the difference sometimes. The trio navigated the maze-like corridors, which seemed to twist and shift with each passing minute, like the universe's most demented funhouse. The station's erratic failures, flickering lights, hissing vents, and unsettling vibrations were a constant reminder of their precarious situation. They stumbled upon a group of alien delegates in a makeshift meeting room, their faces a mosaic of frustration and anger. A few turned, eyes narrowing as Cross and company entered. "Ah, the human contingent," Ambassador Tharax said, his tone dripping with sarcastic warmth. "Will you be saving us today or just adding to the chaos?" "How about a little of both?" Cross shot back. "We're multi-talented." The assembled aliens weren't amused. An Athari delegate whose skin shimmered like an oil spill raised a tendril in protest. "We demand answers, Cross. These dream disturbances are tearing our minds apart." Cross resisted the urge to roll his eyes. "Welcome to our world. Humans have been dealing with nightmares for centuries. We just figured you'd all catch on sooner or later." Not the most diplomatic response, but diplomacy wasn't his strong suit. That was Weiss's department, and even he was struggling to keep a straight face. The ambassador leaned forward, his smarmy demeanor intact. "Captain, if we can't resolve this, the conference will collapse. We need a solution." "No pressure then," Rix muttered from the corner, tinkering with a portable data unit like it might hold the secrets of the cosmos, or at least enough to keep them alive for another day. Cross sighed, feeling the collective weight of their expectations pressing down on him. "Look, we're working on it. But if you've got any bright ideas, now's the time to share." The silence that followed was as encouraging as a death sentence, though Cross had to admit he wasn't expecting anything different. The delegates were too busy pointing fingers and making threats to offer anything useful. He was starting to wonder if he should have taken that janitorial gig on Luna Station instead. As the discussion, or lack thereof, dragged on, Rix's comm link pinged an annoying chirp that made Cross wince. "What now?" Cross asked, half expecting more bad news. Rix shrugged. "Looks like the station's central AI just threw in the towel. Systems are going offline one by one. We're running on borrowed time, Captain." "Fantastic," Weiss said, not missing a beat. "Guess we won't be staying for dessert." Ambassador Tharax wasn't impressed. "Captain, your humor is ill-timed." "My humor's the only thing keeping us from a full-blown panic," Cross retorted. The station trembled ominously, as if to underscore his point. Cross took a deep breath, trying to marshal his thoughts into something resembling a plan. The Syndicate wanted control, and their weapon of choice was the very fabric of their dreams. "Rix," Cross said, turning to his tech specialist, "can we trace the source of these dream disturbances, where they are originating from?" Rix looked skeptical but not dismissive. "It's like trying to catch smoke with a net, but I can try. Just don't expect miracles." "Never do," Cross replied. As Rix got to work, Cross turned his attention back to the delegates. "We're doing everything we can, but we need your cooperation. Keep your people calm, and for the love of whatever deity you believe in, stop trying to kill each other." A Zorat delegate, covered in scales that shifted color with each emotion, hissed in agreement. "We will hold our factions at bay, but your failure will not be tolerated." "Join the club," Weiss muttered under his breath. With the meeting adjourned in a flurry of temper and tension, Cross led his team back into the corridor. The air was thick with stale ambition and desperation, and every step felt like it echoed through the hollowed halls of a dying titan. "Why do I feel like we're in a bad Hollywood?" Weiss asked, trying to lighten the mood. "Because we are," Cross replied. "Only this time there's no director to yell cut." They found Rix hunched over his data unit like a gambler with his last chip. "Got something," he announced, triumph edging his voice. "The disturbances are being amplified from a specific point. Lower decks near the station's core." "Always the lower decks," Drelk muttered. "Why can't it ever be the spa?" Cross ignored him, focusing on the task at hand. "All right, we head there, find out what's really going on." "You know this is a trap, right?" Weiss said, a healthy dose of skepticism in his voice. Cross nodded. "Of course it is, but what's life without a little danger?" "No fun at all," Weiss replied with a smirk. The journey to the lower decks was less a stroll and more an exercise in navigating a shifting labyrinth. If Hell had a space station, Cross was sure it would look something like this. Dimly lit, perpetually malfunctioning, and populated by the universe's most questionable characters. "Rix, keep an eye out for any Syndicate activity," Cross instructed as they moved. "We don't need any surprises." They reached the entrance to the core, a foreboding door etched with warnings in every known language. Cross half expected it to whisper threats or spontaneously combust. "Here goes nothing," Cross said, slapping the panel to open the door. The room beyond was bathed in an eerie light, tinged with a strange energy that set his skin crawling. It was like stepping into a dream or a nightmare. Equipment lined the walls, pulsating with a hypnotic rhythm that suggested something far beyond normal human understanding. "Looks like we found the epicenter," Weiss said, eyeing the machinery with equal parts curiosity and dread. Cross approached the main console, his instincts screaming that this was the heart of their troubles. "Rix, can you make sense of this?" Rix stepped forward, his expression a mix of awe and terror. "It's a neural amplifier, designed to enhance and project dreams or nightmares across the station." "Who'd be crazy enough to build something like this?" Weiss asked. Drelk snorted. "Humans, probably." Cross wasn't sure if he should be offended or impressed by the accuracy. "Can we shut it down?" Rix hesitated. "It's deep in the station's systems." "Shutting it down might take everything offline, meaning the station would implode," Weiss observed helpfully. "Exactly," Rix confirmed. Cross weighed the options, which were about as appealing as a punch to the face. "Can we reverse it, make it help us instead of hurt us?" Rix scratched his chin, a gesture Cross knew meant the gears were turning. "It's possible, but it would take time. And if the Syndicate realizes what we're doing, they won't be sending a fruit basket," Weiss finished. Cross considered the risks, his mind a whirl of potential outcomes. They'd come this far, and the idea of giving up was as foreign to him as the concept of a peaceful conference. "Do it," he decided. "We don't have any other choice." As Rix worked, the room seemed to pulse with an even greater urgency, the hum of the station's systems growing louder, more insistent. Cross wondered if they were about to witness the universe's largest malfunction up close. "Captain," Rix called, urgency in his voice. "We've got company." Cross turned to see a group of Syndicate operatives pouring into the room, their expressions a mix of triumph and hostility. "Looks like they didn't want to miss the party," he remarked, drawing his sidearm. The ensuing firefight was as chaotic as it was inevitable, plasma bolts crisscrossing the room in a deadly light show. Cross ducked behind a console, firing back with as much precision as the weight of their predicament would allow. "Rix, how's it going?" Cross yelled over the din. "Almost there," Rix shouted back, his fingers dancing over the controls with frenetic energy. Drelk, proving once again that Grillian reflexes were nothing to scoff at, managed to take down a couple of thugs with terrifying efficiency. "Humans sure know how to throw a party," he quipped, breathless. "Wait until you see the after-party," Weiss replied, taking down another syndicate member with a well-aimed shot. Cross could feel the tension in the room rising, like the universe itself was holding its breath. Rix, now would be a good time for a miracle. As if on cue, the station seemed to shudder with a new kind of energy, one that swept through the room like a wave of relief. The lights flickered and then steadied, the oppressive hum of the dream amplifier shifting to a soothing resonance. "Got it," Rix declared, a grin breaking through the grime and sweat on his face. "We've reversed the effects." The amplifiers calming the station instead of destabilizing it. The syndicate operatives, sensing their defeat, began to retreat, their expressions tinged with disbelief. Cross didn't waste time celebrating their victory, knowing full well that one battle won didn't mean the war was over. "Let's get out of here before they have a change of heart," Cross ordered, leading his team back through the corridors that had become disturbingly familiar. The aftermath was a mix of relief and exhaustion, the station system stabilizing as the delegates began to realize the immediate threat was over. Cross felt a grim satisfaction in knowing they'd bought themselves some time, even if the future was as uncertain as ever. "Well, Captain," Tharax said when they regrouped with the delegates, "it seems you've managed to avert disaster once again." "Just another day at the office," Cross replied, his voice laced with the weariness of 1,000 similar days. With the station now stable and the delegates more or less pacified, Cross allowed himself a moment to breathe, though the respite felt as fragile as spun glass. "Think we'll get a bonus for this?" Weiss asked, only half joking. "Only if we survive long enough to collect it," Cross replied, the weight of the universe still heavy on his shoulders but manageable for now. For better or worse, the chaos had been temporarily quelled. But as Cross knew all too well in their line of work, peace was just the calm before the storm. If there was ever a moment Cross felt like he was about to lose his marbles, it had to be this one. The station's corridors still whispered with the echoes of gunfire, yet here he was, contemplating dreams as a weapon. It sounded more like the plot of a bad sci-fi novel than a tactical maneuver. But then again, reality had been slipping into the absurd since the peace conference had kicked off, so why not? Cross leaned against a wall, his mind sifting through the chaos like a miner panning for gold in a river of mud. The dream disturbances had to be deliberate, a way for the syndicate to keep the conference in perpetual disarray. But what if they could turn the tables? Use the very fabric of those dreams against their saboteurs. It was a long shot, but when had anything ever been easy? Weiss was the first to poke his head around the corner, apparently drawn by the loud hum of Cross's brain trying to work. "You look like you've just seen an Athari trying to dance," he remarked, a grin teasing at his lips. "Feels about the same," Cross muttered. "I'm thinking these dream disturbances might be more than just a nuisance." Weiss raised an eyebrow, the universal sign for do go on. "If we can figure out how the syndicate's manipulating them, maybe we can flip the script," Cross said, a hint of manic determination in his voice. "Dangerous game," Weiss noted, always the realist. "We be trying to do what they're doing, just in reverse. You know anyone who's good at dreaming up nightmares on command?" "I'm standing next to one," Cross replied dryly. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Captain," Weiss chuckled, but his eyes turned serious. "So what's the plan? We have a dream date with destiny," Cross shrugged. "First, we figure out the pattern. Find the connection between the dreams and the syndicate's operations. Rix might be able to help with that. Assuming he's not busy rearranging the universe, Weiss said. But yeah, makes sense to loop him in. He's already got one foot in the tech world and another in the Twilight Zone. They made their way back to the makeshift ops center they'd set up, which was really just a storage room that didn't smell too much like despair. There, Rix was surrounded by a sea of holographic displays, each casting a ghostly light that made him look like he belonged on the cover of a particularly depressing rock album. Rix, Cross called, snapping the techie out of whatever coding daydream he was lost in. We need to talk about dreams, how the syndicate's using them and how we can use them back. Rix blinked, then nodded slowly like someone who'd just been asked to explain string theory to a toddler. I've been thinking along those lines, he admitted. The disturbances, they follow patterns. It's like the syndicate's broadcasting nightmares on a loop. Weiss leaned in, eager for a distraction from reality. So what, they just flip a switch and bam, we're all stuck playing the universe's worst sleepover game. Pretty much. Rix scratched his head, fingers disappearing into a mess of hair. But the thing is, dreams are a two-way street. If we can hijack their signal, we might be able to send something back. Cross liked the sound of that. Fighting fire with fire, or in this case, nightmares with nightmares. How do we sync up with their system? Rix gestured to the swirling data streams that mirrored the chaos in his head. We need to isolate the dream patterns that match the syndicate's activity. They're using specific frequencies to target key personnel like the delegates. If we can piggyback on those frequencies, we can send them a little surprise of our own, Cross finished, already imagining the possibilities. What do we need to get it done? A lot of luck, Rix said, ever the optimist, and some serious code breaking. The syndicate's encryption is no joke. It'll take time. We've got time, Cross lied, knowing full well they didn't. But optimism was a luxury he couldn't afford to show weakness to. Do it. We'll buy you as much time as we can. As Rix dove into the digital mayhem, Cross turned to Weiss. We need to keep the syndicate off our backs while Rix works. Any bright ideas? Weiss tapped his chin, the universal gesture for I'm about to bullshit my way through this. We could stage a diversion, something to keep them busy. Maybe leak some intel, make them chase ghosts while we deal with the real threat. Drelk could help with that, Cross mused. His Grillian contacts might have some dirt we can use. Guess it's time to roll the dice, Weiss said, already moving to put the plan into action. Let's hope they come up sixes. With a nod, Cross watched him go, feeling a strange mix of hope and dread settle in his chest. Their plan was risky, sure, but if they pulled it off, it could turn the tide. As he turned back to the task at hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were all just characters in a cosmic joke, the punchline waiting patiently in the wings. As the hours ticked by, Rix's fingers moved in a blur, his mind a whirlwind of codes and algorithms. The air in the ops center was thick with tension, and the stale aroma of recycled air, which barely masked the underlying scent of sweat and anxiety. Cross paced like a caged animal, the waiting gnawing at his nerves. Drelk sauntered in, a cocky grin plastered on his face. Got some news, Captain, he drawled, like a man who knew he was about to drop a bombshell. Good or bad? Cross asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Depends on your perspective, Drelk shrugged. Turns out the syndicate's been using a back-channel network. My contacts can feed them some premium nonsense, enough to keep them busy for a while. Cross nodded, a rare glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Good work. Let's hope it buys us the time we need. Drelk gave a mock salute, happy to confuse and mislead. As Drelk slipped out, Cross turned back to Rix, who was still buried deep in code. How's it coming? Rix didn't look up, his focus absolute. It's like playing chess with a black hole. I think I've got the pattern pinpointed, but I'll need a bit longer to crack the encryption. No pressure, Cross said, which of course meant all the pressure. Just remember the universe is counting on you. Rix snorted, the sound somehow reassuring. Great. No pressure at all. Meanwhile, Weiss had been busy spreading their carefully crafted false information across the station, a game of interstellar telephone designed to keep the syndicate chasing its tail. "Think they'll buy it?" Cross asked when Weiss returned. Weiss shrugged, the picture of nonchalance. "If they don't, at least we'll have given them a headache." And that's worth something. The Iors dragged on, each minute feeling like an Ior in its own right. Cross could feel the weight of their plan pressing down on him, a reminder that this was more than just a game of cat and mouse. This was about survival, his crews, the delegates, maybe even the whole damn stations. Finally, Rix let out a triumphant cry, a sound so unexpected that Cross nearly dropped his comm link. "Got it," Rix exclaimed, eyes wide with disbelief. "We've tapped into their network. We can send a dream signal back." "Perfect," Cross said, relief flooding through him like a long-awaited drink at the end of a dry spell. "Let's show the syndicate what we're made of." Rix took a deep breath, cracking his knuckles with the air of a man about to dive into the deep end. "All right," setting the coordinates. "We're about to give them a taste of their own medicine." Cross and Weiss exchanged a glance, the kind that spoke volumes without a single word. This was it. The culmination of a mad plan hatched in the heat of desperation. If they succeeded, they'd buy themselves more than just time. They'd secure a chance at turning this debacle into something resembling a success. The station seemed to hold its breath as Rix initiated the signal, the hum of the systems shifting into a new, unfamiliar frequency. Cross could almost feel the tension ripple through the air, a tangible force that hung over them like a storm cloud. For a moment, nothing happened. The universe seemed to pause, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. And then, slowly but surely, the change began. The oppressive atmosphere that had pervaded the station began to lift, the sense of foreboding that had clung to every corner receding like the tide. Cross felt a flicker of hope, a rare and precious thing in his line of work. Maybe, just maybe, they'd managed to turn the tide in their favor. But only time would tell. "We did it," Rix murmured, disbelief coloring his voice. "I can't believe we actually did it." Cross clapped him on the shoulder, a rare gesture of camaraderie. "Believe it. Now let's make sure it sticks." As they made their way back to the conference hall, the oppressive gloom that had hung over the station began to dissipate. The air felt lighter, the sense of impending doom receding like a bad memory. But Cross knew better than to celebrate too soon. The syndicate wouldn't take this lying down. "Think they'll come after us?" Weiss asked, his tone more curious than worried. "I'd be disappointed if they didn't," Cross replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "But for now, I'll take a victory where I can get it." The delegates, now freed from the grip of their nightmares, were slowly regaining their composure. Cross watched as they conferred in hushed tones, the weight of their ordeal still lingering in their eyes. "Captain," Tharax said, approaching with a measured grace, "you've managed to avert disaster, at least for now." "Just doing my job," Cross replied, his voice laced with a weary humor. "Though I wouldn't mind a little less excitement next time." Tharax chuckled, the sound warm and somehow reassuring. "I doubt the universe will grant us such a luxury." "Figures," Cross said, casting a glance at Weiss and Drelk, who were busy swapping war stories with the other delegates. "We'll keep an eye on things, make sure the syndicate doesn't try anything else." With a nod, Tharax returned to the fold, leaving Cross to ponder the strange twists of fate that had brought them here. "Well, that was fun," Weiss commented, coming up beside him. "Think we'll manage to keep things quiet for a while?" Cross shrugged, the weight of their ordeal still pressing down on him. "Who knows? In this line of work, peace is just the calm before the storm." They stood together, watching as the delegates resumed their negotiations, the specter of what could have been still looming in the back of their minds. The station might be stable for now, but Cross knew better than to let his guard down. In the grimdark expanse of space, there were no guarantees, only the promise of another challenge just over the horizon. For now, they'd take the win. And maybe, just maybe, they'd manage to carve out a little peace in the chaos. But if not, well, They'd face whatever came next with the same irreverent determination that had gotten them this far. After all, in space, no one could hear you scream, but they damn sure could hear you laugh. The Arbitrium station still felt like a place where nightmares went to vacation, but at least the howling void in the delegates' brains had dialed down to a tolerable whisper. Captain Riven Cross felt the change in the air, a bit like the calm after a particularly nasty storm, or maybe the eye of it. He liked to think of himself as an optimist, but in this line of work, that was just another word for naive fool. Rix was still riding the high of their recent victory like a kid on too much sugar. "We actually did it," he repeated, as if saying it enough times would make it stick. Yeah, genius at work, blah, blah," Weiss interjected, tossing a half-eaten protein bar aside. "But don't break your arm patting yourself on the back. The Syndicate's not going to take this lying down," he said, echoing Cross's earlier thought. "They're like space cockroaches. Except cockroaches have the decency to scatter when you turn on the light," Cross remarked. The station's corridors were no longer echoing with the sound of gunfire, which was a small mercy, but the oppressive gloom still clung like a particularly persistent piece of gum. The hiss of failing systems was a constant reminder that they were tiptoeing along a knife's edge. One misstep, and they'd be space debris. Drelk shuffled back into the ops center, looking like he'd just crawled out of a trash compactor, a fitting metaphor for his life choices. "So, what's next, fearless leader?" he asked, dropping into a chair and propping his feet up like he owned the place. Cross glanced at the holoscreen, which was currently displaying a pixelated view of Arbitrium Station's exterior. No obvious signs of impending doom, but with the Syndicate, subtlety was their middle name, right after backstabbing and betrayal. "We need to shore up defenses," Cross declared, turning to Rix. "Any chance you can do some magic with the systems, keep those Syndicate bastards out?" Rix scratched his head, a gesture that usually meant he was about to suggest something insane. "I can jury-rig a few things, maybe reroute some power. It won't be pretty, but it'll give us a fighting chance." "Good," Cross said, knowing full well that jury-rigged was a euphemism for this might blow up in our faces. As Rix got to work, Cross turned his attention to the peace conference. The delegates were still milling about, looking like they'd just woken up from a particularly vivid nightmare. Ambassador Tharax, with his vaguely humanoid shape and oil-slick skin, approached, exuding an aura of sarcastic warmth that could melt glaciers, if glaciers had any sense of humor. "Captain," Tharax said, his voice smooth as polished metal, "it appears you've managed to delay Armageddon." "I must admit, it's rather impressive." Cross shrugged, because what else could you do when an alien was complimenting your ability to duct tape the universe together? "Just another day at the office. You guys ready to get back to your negotiating table?" Tharax's expression shifted into something resembling a smile, though with his species it was hard to tell. "Ready as we'll ever be." The Athari delegate is eager to resume talks, though I suspect it's more out of a desire to leave this station than to secure peace. Cross couldn't blame them. Arbitrium Station had all the charm of a haunted house, without the promise of candy at the end. "Tell them we're doing our best to keep this place from falling apart. Or at least keep it from falling apart more." With a nod, Tharax returned to the fold, leaving Cross to ponder the bizarre twists of fate that had brought them to this point. He'd signed up for mercenary work expecting a few skirmishes, the odd boarding party, but playing diplomat was a whole different bag of worms. "Captain," Weiss called, pulling him out of his reverie, "we've got movement on the external sensors." "Looks like the Syndicate's trying to sneak a team on board." Cross didn't miss a beat. "Figures. Probably coming to thank us for the lovely dream we sent them." "How do you want to handle it?" Weiss asked, his expression a mask of faux innocence that Cross knew all too well. "Same way we handle all uninvited guests," Cross replied. "Roll out the unwelcome mat and hope they slip on the way in." With that, Cross rallied his crew. The arrogance might have been a cobbled-together pile of metal and circuits, but it was their pile, and they'd defend it like a pack of junkyard dogs. The syndicate's arrival was as subtle as expected, which is to say, not at all. Alarms blared, the kind that made you think twice about what you were doing with your life. The air was thick with the promise of violence, a tension so palpable you could almost slice it with a knife and serve it on toast. Cross led the charge, flanked by his ragtag crew. Weiss had his blaster at the ready, while Drelk clutched a weapon that looked suspiciously homemade. Grillion Special, Drelk explained with a wicked grin. Perfect for ruining someone's day. As they approached the docking bay, Cross took a deep breath. All right, team. Let's give them a warm arbitrium welcome. The syndicate operatives, clearly underestimating their reception, moved with the arrogance of people who thought they owned the place. Cross could almost admire their bravado if he wasn't so busy planning how to kick them off his station. The first shots rang out, a symphony of chaos that echoed through the corridors. Cross ducked behind a support column, returning fire with practiced precision. The exchange was brief and brutal, the kind of skirmish that would give a normal person nightmares, if Cross hadn't become numb to such things long ago. Rix, having wrapped up his system tweaks, joined the fray with a device that looked like it might explode if you sneezed near it. He tossed it into the midst of the syndicate squad, and for a moment Cross wondered if this was how they'd all go out. Instead, the device emitted a pulse that sent the intruders reeling, disoriented, like they'd just stepped off a particularly nasty roller coaster. "Rick's special," he announced with a grin. "Patent pending." Cross took advantage of the chaos, leading his crew in a swift, decisive counterattack. The syndicate operatives, caught off guard, fell back, retreating with all the grace of a drunk stumbling home after a night out. "Nice work," Cross said, clapping Rix on the back. "Next time try to make it a little less experimental, yeah." Rix chuckled, unrepentant. "Where's the fun in that?" With the immediate threat neutralized, Cross regrouped with his team. They bought themselves some breathing room, but he knew better than to get complacent. The syndicate was like a hydra, cut off one head and two more would inevitably take its place. "We need to secure the docking bay," Cross said, his tone all business. "Make sure they can't try that again." Weiss nodded, already moving to set up additional defenses. "I'll handle it." "Might even throw in a few surprises just to keep them on their toes." Drelk, ever the opportunist, chimed in. "I might have a few tricks up my sleeve as well. Grillion hospitality, you know." The station's intercom crackled to life, the voice of Ambassador Therax coming through with a clarity that was both unexpected and unwelcome. "Captain Cross, we've resumed negotiations. Your efforts are appreciated." Cross could almost hear the unspoken but at the end of that sentence. "Glad to be of service. Anything else I can do to make your stay more enjoyable?" "Not unless you can conjure up a new station," Therax replied, a hint of humor in his voice. "But I suspect that's beyond even your formidable capabilities." Cross chuckled, shaking his head. "For now, keeping this one in one piece is challenge enough." As Therax signed off, Cross turned his attention back to his crew. They were a motley bunch, mismatched and rough around the edges, but they were his, and he'd trust them with his life any day of the week. "All right, team," Cross said, clapping his hands together. "Let's make sure we keep this station in one piece, at least long enough for the diplomats to bore themselves into an agreement." With that, they set to work, each crew member falling into their roles with the ease of well-oiled machinery. They might have been a ragtag bunch, but they were damn good at what they did, and Cross wouldn't trade them for anything. The minutes ticked by, each one bringing its own brand of tension, like waiting for the other shoe to drop, or for the syndicate to stage yet another ill-advised attack. But as the hours stretched on, a strange sort of peace descended over the station. It wasn't the calm before the storm, more like the calm after one. A rare, precious thing in the grimdark corners of the universe. Cross found himself back in the conference hall, watching as the delegates hashed out the details of their fragile peace. There were still shadows under their eyes, but the nightmares had receded, replaced by a cautious optimism that Cross had thought impossible in this place. "Captain," Therax said, approaching with that same measured grace, as if he glided rather than walked. It appears your efforts have borne fruit. The negotiations are progressing. Cross raised an eyebrow. Progressing toward what exactly? Therex inclined his head, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Toward a peace agreement, believe it or not. Well, I'll be damned, Cross said, genuinely surprised. Guess we'll have to find a new favorite enemy. Indeed, Therex replied, amusement dancing in his eyes. Though I suspect the universe won't leave us wanting for long. As the delegates continued their talks, Cross allowed himself a moment to breathe, to savor the rare taste of victory. It wasn't the end of their troubles, far from it, but it was a step in the right direction, and that was more than he dared hope for. Think they'll actually pull it off? Weiss asked, joining him at the edge of the room. Cross shrugged, the weight of the station's woes still resting on his shoulders. Who knows, but if they do, at least we can say we had a hand in it. The two men stood in companionable silence, watching as history unfolded. It wasn't the grand, sweeping sort of history that got recorded in the annals of time, but it was theirs, and that was enough. In the distance, the stars winked against the vast, endless black of space. Cross knew better than to assume they'd seen the last of the syndicate, or that the universe would suddenly become a kinder, gentler place. But for now, they had a rare moment of calm. And sometimes, in a universe that seemed determined to keep you on your toes, that was enough. Cross leaned back against the cold metal wall of the conference hall, his mind a merry-go-round of weary thoughts and half-formed plans. The peace talks were like trying to herd a group of cats, which were coincidentally on fire. Yet somehow they'd managed to do it without the whole thing going up in flames. Quite the accomplishment, he muttered to himself, though he wasn't sure if he meant the peace or the fact that they hadn't been blown off the map. Maybe both. Weiss sidled up, his face a mosaic of skepticism and mild amusement. So what do we do now, Captain? Throw a party, bake a cake? Yeah, and we can invite the syndicate, Cross replied dryly. I'm sure they'd love the chance to crash it. Weiss chuckled. Wouldn't be the first time. The truth was, Cross didn't entirely know how to process this turn of events. Sure, they'd managed to slap a band-aid over the gaping wound that was the diplomatic situation, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before someone came along to rip it off. Think they'll keep it together? Weiss asked, nodding toward the knot of delegates still huddled around the table, their voices a low murmur of half-hearted optimism. Cross shrugged, running a hand through his hair, which at this point resembled a bird's nest after a hurricane. We did our part. If they can't keep it together, that's on them. Drelk joined them, his ever-present smirk accompanied by the faint smell of something burning. Good news, Captain. The station's still in one piece. Cross nodded. That's great, Drelk. I'd hate for the real estate value to plummet. Drelk laughed, a sound that was somewhere between a cackle and a cough. I mean, they might even pay us to leave. Cross shook his head, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. We can dream. Speaking of dreams, the whole nightmare as a weapon scenario still hovered at the back of his mind, like an itch he couldn't quite reach. The idea of humans weaponizing their dreams was both fascinating and terrifying. And now that the immediate threat had been dealt with, Cross had the luxury of pondering the implications. Rix appeared, sporting a smug smile that suggested he either saved the day or was about to suggest karaoke. Well, look at us. The Arrogance crew, saviors of a station. Don't get too comfortable, Cross replied, ever the pragmatist. This piece is as fragile as Drelk's homemade grenades. True, Rix agreed, not missing a beat. But at least we're not the ones picking up the pieces. Therax glided over, exuding the kind of calm that suggested he'd seen it all and was still unimpressed. Captain Cross, he said, his voice a smooth echo, I must commend you and your team. Without your intervention, these talks would surely have failed. Glad we could help, Ambassador, Cross replied, his tone genuine despite the sarcasm lurking just below the surface. But you know as well as I do that the real work starts now. Therax inclined his head, acknowledging the truth of Cross's words. Indeed. But you and your crew have paved the way for a brighter future, however tenuous it may be. Cross wasn't sure how bright he'd call it, given the station's flickering lights and the ominous creaks echoing through the corridors, but he supposed it was all relative. "Just doing our job," he said, as though their job description included saving the universe from itself. Tharax glanced back at the delegates. "I hope we have given these factions a reason to reconsider their hostilities." "We'll see," Cross replied, a note of cynicism in his voice. "History isn't exactly littered with happy endings." "True," Tharax agreed, a rare hint of warmth in his tone, "but perhaps this time it will be different." "That's the spirit," Weiss remarked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Hope for the best, prepare for the worst." "Which, incidentally," Rick said, gesturing toward the ship, "is exactly what we're doing." The crew of the Arrogance had spent so long skirting the edges of chaos that they'd become experts at making the best of a bad situation. But even they had to admit that the notion of leaving the station in one piece, both figuratively and literally, felt like a victory. Cross made his way to the ship, his crew trailing behind like a band of eccentric ducks. Once aboard, he was struck by the strange comfort of the familiar. The Arrogance might have been a haphazard collection of parts held together by sheer stubbornness, but it was home. "All right, folks," he announced, taking the helm with practiced ease. "Let's get out of here before they change their minds and ask us to stay." Rick slid into the co-pilot's seat, grinning like a kid who'd just discovered how to pilfer candy. "You got it, Captain. Next stop, anywhere but here." The ship hummed to life, a symphony of clanks and whirs that was music to Cross's ears. Part of him wondered if they'd ever find true peace in the universe. But then he remembered who he was and where they were, and that thought evaporated faster than a puddle on a sun-scorched planet. As the Arrogance pulled away from Arbitrium Station, Cross couldn't help but look back. The station, a sprawling testament to humanity's ambition and folly, receded into the distance, a tiny speck in the vastness of space. "Think we made a difference?" Weiss asked, leaning back in his chair, the question more philosophical than practical. Cross paused, considering. "Maybe not today or tomorrow, but we gave them a chance, and sometimes that's all you can do." Drelk, never one for deep contemplation, chimed in. "At least we didn't blow the place up." "That's progress. You set the bar low enough and everything's an achievement," Rix added, his tone light but his words ringing true. Cross chuckled, shaking his head. "In that case, we're the top of the class." The crew settled into the rhythm of space travel, their banter a comforting counterpoint to the hum of the engines. Despite the chaos and uncertainty, there was something undeniably satisfying about knowing they'd done their part. "What's next, Captain?" Rix asked, fiddling with a panel that looked like it was held together by a prayer and some wishful thinking. "Well," Cross replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips, "we could always find another peace conference to crash." The idea of making a living out of being professional diplomats was almost laughable. But then again, if they'd learned anything, it was that the universe was full of surprises. "Or we could try something less likely to get us killed," Weiss suggested, his tone dry as the void outside. "Where's the fun in that?" Drelk asked, already plotting their next adventure or disaster depending on your perspective. Cross leaned back, the weight of the universe momentarily lighter on his shoulders. "Whatever we do, we'll do it together." "That's enough for me." As the Arrogance sailed through space, Cross reflected on the mission's challenges, the near misses, and the unexpected alliances. It was a strange feeling, knowing they'd managed to unite humans and aliens if only for a brief moment. "Here's to us," Cross said, raising an imaginary glass. "The unlikely heroes of a universe that never stops trying to kill us." "Cheers," Weiss replied, the word both mocking and sincere. "To survival," Rix added, grinning like a madman as he punched a few more buttons. "And to the next big mess," Drelk finished, because if there was one thing they could count on, it was the universe's endless capacity for chaos. Cross settled back, the stars stretching endlessly before them, a vast expanse of unknowns and possibilities. They might not have all the answers, and they sure as hell weren't perfect, but they'd face whatever came next with their usual mix of bravado, sarcasm, and maybe even a little hope. And sometimes, in a universe that seemed determined to keep you on your toes, that was more than enough.